Hey, listen, my name is Cliff. If you haven't met me yet, nice to meet you. Come to see me after the service. That'd be awesome. Glad to have the opportunity to just share with you guys this morning a little bit about who Jesus is as we continue our series entitled Jesus Is. And if you were to go around and ask maybe 10 random people in our world, who is Jesus? What is he about? There's a good chance you're going to get 10 different answers from these people. There's a good chance that you're going to hear a number of different things. Maybe he was a prophet or a good man or a teacher, even a rabbi. You may hear that he was the Son of God, the Messiah. You may hear that he's a fairy tale made up just to kind of perpetuate some false religion that somebody doesn't believe in. But what we've been doing and continuing to do over the summer is to just investigate, who is Jesus? What does he say about himself? What is he all about? What makes Jesus Jesus? And so we're going to continue on in that this morning. And so as we think about this idea of Jesus is the point. Jesus is the point. It was mentioned already, and we're going to just continue that thought and wondering, what does it mean that Jesus is the point of life, that Jesus is the point for you and the point for me? See, I grew up playing basketball as a kid and as a teen, and I was reasonably good at it, and I enjoyed playing for the team for school and all of that good stuff. And so I came up and I realized that basketball, one of the things that I loved so much about it is that basketball can be one of the biggest highlights or the biggest heartbreaks in life. The game of basketball can be exhilarating and exciting and wonderful, and the game of basketball can be absolutely heart-wrenching, all in the same moment, depending on which side, which team you're on. I want you to check out this video, and I just want you to let me know, is this an exciting, exhilarating moment, or is this a heartbreaking moment? Right here, check this one out. Heartbreaking or like exciting? What was it? Exciting? Heartbreaking? Alright, depends on which team you're on, because if you didn't catch what just happened, the game was down to 3 seconds left. There was 1 point difference between the teams, and this was in Oklahoma City. It was the Oklahoma High School State Championship game, and if you didn't catch what actually happened, the guy who took the inbound pass, his name is Trey Johnson, he takes the inbound pass. His team was winning. When they flashed up to 36-37, his team was ahead. His job was to dribble out the clock for 3 seconds, not lose the ball, not get fouled, not extend the game by any more time, and just run out the clock and win by 1 point. And instead, he takes the perfect inbound, finds himself completely alone, and decides, I'm going to go take the layup and take the glory here in this moment. And as he makes that perfect layup, the entire gym realizes that he made it into the wrong basket. And as he shot that game-winning shot into the wrong basket, he lost his team the state championship and also made national news at the same time. Probably one of the most hated high school basketball players of all time, Trey Johnson. Basketball is a heart-wrenching thing. So here's the thing, you guys, is that Trey Johnson made the perfect play. He made the right play in the wrong place. And the problem is that the right play made in the wrong place at the end of the day is the wrong play. And what we see in the Bible in Mark chapter 7, if you brought a Bible, go ahead and start turning to Mark chapter 7. If you didn't bring a Bible but you have a smartphone, go ahead and pull up an app called YouVersion. If you don't have it yet, make sure that you get it. We like cell phones at Ignite. They can be a useful tool for spiritual growth. I would love to see you on it, not tweeting your friends while I'm speaking. But, tweeting the amazing things that get said from this stage, as Mike alluded to last week. But Mark chapter 7, on your phones or in your Bibles, you can check this out starting in verse 1. It says this: "The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed." Down to verse 5. "So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, 'Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating food with their defiled hands?'" What we see happening in Mark chapter 7 is a right play made in the wrong place by the Pharisees. They come and they attack Jesus over this issue of hand washing. And so they come to him and they say, "Why do your disciples come and grab food and eat with defiled, unwashed hands?" And so there's kind of this logical argument there, as far as I'm concerned, that these guys would show up after a day in the marketplace and a day out doing their thing and not wash their hands before beginning to eat. Like, the Pharisees come and you would think that this is an issue of like, dude, get your grubby hands out of the public bowl of bread, right? Like, don't touch it with your dirty hands. That's really gross. In fact, have you ever gone into a public bathroom, like in a restaurant, and you see the little signs that say, like, "State law and common decency require that all employees wash their hands before returning to work"? I've literally seen that sign. Common decency requires that you would wash your hands if you're an employee. How many of you have ever had that awkward moment where you walk in as an employee is walking out after blatantly not washing their hands in the restroom? You ever been there? Yeah, am I the only one? Couple of you? Yeah. And I don't really know what to make of that situation, because besides maybe not buying food from that establishment ever again in my life, I don't know what to do in that situation, because hand washing can be like kind of a weird thing. And it's pretty gross, but in fact, there was a study that I just heard about recently that showed that only 6% of Americans properly wash their hands. Only 6% of Americans properly wash their hands. You know the whole thing where you're supposed to stand in front of the sink and sing happy birthday twice while you scrub like all the way up to the top of your head? I mean, it just gets ridiculous every time they talk about how to do it right. You may as well just take a shower 4, 5, 6 times a day, because that's what washing your hands is anymore. But very few people actually do it. So like those of you germaphobes that still think grabbing the door handle with a napkin makes a difference, it doesn't. You're just, the other 94% of our nation are killing you slowly. So just resign yourself to it, just deal with it. You'll be alright. It builds your immunities. But like, hand washing is weird. Hand washing can become one of those awkward issues for somebody who doesn't do it right, and that's what happens here. But here's the difference. When the Pharisees come after Jesus for his disciples not washing their hands, it's not even an issue of cleanliness, it's an issue of holiness for them. It's not about the dirt on their hands. It's a ceremonial washing that Jesus' disciples didn't do before coming to eat. The issue was not about your hands being dirty. The issue that the Pharisees brought was your disciples didn't follow the rules. There are rules written down about this, and your disciples didn't follow it. You see them say, "Why don't your guys follow the traditions that were laid out for us?" It's about following the rules. And so then you have Jesus, and he has this moment to respond, and he comes back at the Pharisees with sort of like a first century "come at me, bro," and this is what he does. He calls them like hypocrites who don't know anything about worship. Move down a couple of verses, down to verse 6. He replied, this is Jesus, "Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You've let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." You may have noticed this massive piece of art that some of my friends from Ethos, our young adult ministry here at Eastside, were so nice to come set back up for us. I had the opportunity to share a very similar message on Wednesday to our young adult crew, and we have this piece of art with just these words of worship coming out of a set of lips, while all of the time there's this dirty, broken, and far from God heart being represented here. And so just kind of take that in as we kind of continue on. Just so you know, I did get to speak a real similar message on Wednesday, but like, don't tell, but I like you guys a little better. So like, I did some work to it. Hopefully you're going to get the good version, right? It was like practice run with those guys, but you guys are going to get the good version. So let me be clear. When Jesus responds to the Pharisees by saying, "You hypocrites," You worship me with your lips, you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. Jesus is not condemning religion. Jesus is not condemning religious practice. In fact, Jesus is condemning what we call religiosity. And religiosity is this: an affected or excessive devotion to religion. An affected or excessive devotion to religion. And this is what it means. Following the law isn't bad. Following what the Old Testament says about purity and cleanliness and holiness, that's not bad. What's bad is when instead of letting that produce a high moral standard and create upstanding citizens in any given culture, when we make the law an end unto itself, when we make the law the final goal, we begin to find ourselves neck deep in what we call religiosity. Following the law for the sake of the law instead of the sake of God is what I call a misguided sense of piety and a false sense of righteousness. I'm good because of what I do, instead of who Jesus is. So we need to kind of boil this down to a question of priority and a question of perspective. We need to ask ourselves a couple of questions when we think about, what are the religious things that I do? The things that I do regularly, the things that I do over and over that are supposed to draw me near to God, what are those? Showing up to youth group, reading my Bible, getting to a connection group and encouraging my friends and being encouraged by them, praying, and all of these things that Christians do. We need to ask ourselves two huge questions. Why do I do them? And what's the end game for me? What's my end goal in doing these things? Why am I even doing them? Because if we don't ask those questions and we just go through the motions, what we're practicing is religiosity that just gets you further along in a religion and no closer to God at the end of the day. And what I see happening is that there's a word called virtue. Virtue meaning that something is just overall good, that something points in the right direction. And I once heard a philosopher define virtue as doing the right thing at the right time with the right motivation. And when you have all three of those pieces put together, you have a virtuous act. What you did was for the right reasons. It was at the right timing, and it was the right thing to do. If you only have one or two of these things, then the chances are that your act wasn't really virtuous. There was some other ulterior motive. There was some other gain for you out of it. There was something else driving that action. And when you lack one of these things, you find yourself in the midst of religiosity. And religiosity produces, I think, three things that we're going to take a look at from Mark chapter 7. The first thing that religiosity produces is measuring stick religion. Measuring stick religion looks like this. I don't even know if they still have these in schools, but like when you're in elementary school, I know when I was a little guy, it was a lot longer ago than when you were, but like, you remember yardsticks? Like the big giant ruler that's like as tall as you as a kid? Like if you went to Catholic school, you might have gotten cracked with one. Like that might be for the older leaders. You might remember. I didn't ever get hit with a yardstick, but they're scary. They're big. And what we use those for is just for measuring different things. And that was always fun as a kid to have just like a giant ruler. I was a pretty simple kid, so things like that were pretty fun for me. But measuring stick religion looks a little bit like this. The more I do, the better I am. The more I do, the better I am. To do is to be holy. And then we use the measuring stick to size ourselves up next to other people. Right? Like, I do more of what God says that I should do than Holden does. So I'm better than Holden in front of God. But Holden does way more for God than Amir has ever dreamed of. Sorry. And so we use this measuring stick to go, well, I'm a little further along than that guy, so it's all good. It's kind of like the saying, like, if two of us are being chased by a bear, I don't have to be faster than a bear, I just have to be faster than you, right? Some of you guys got that. And so the idea is this, like, as long as I'm a little bit further along this religious measuring stick, I'm a little bit higher up than the guy behind me, then I'm all good. As long as I'm not the lowest point, I'm doing okay. And the law serves as a point of comparison to other people, how much of the law I follow. Here's the problem. The real measuring stick of righteousness is Jesus. The real measuring stick of righteousness is the holiness and perfection of God in heaven. And that no matter what we do, we're never going to stack up to that perfection. In fact, Isaiah chapter 64 verse 6 tells us that all our righteous acts are as filthy rags. The best thing that we can do is meant for the garbage when you stack it up next to perfection. So if you're banking on following the law to be the thing that puts you in the good graces of God, you've missed the point. Because the problem is you'll never be holy, but through Jesus, you have been made holy. No act of yourself, but through his work on the cross, as we're going to get into a little bit later. Performance is not the point. Jesus is the point. The second thing that we see happening when religiosity takes over our lives is what I like to call loophole religion. And loophole religion is a really interesting thing. It's when we use our religion, we use our faith to accomplish selfish means in our own lives. It's confusing the commands of God with human traditions that we use to kind of manipulate our faith to do what we want it to do. What are the commands of God? The commands of God are the foundational things laid out by God that if we were to follow them, our lives would look godly. If you remember from the Old Testament, when God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. You've heard of the 10 Commandments? Yes? Raise your hand if you've heard of the 10 Commandments. Okay, most of you are still awake. Good. We're doing all right. The 10 Commandments were 10 simple rules set out by God that if those 10 were followed, then you would be a pretty godly person headed in the direction of what God's desire for your life was. And over time, what the Israelites did was they went, these 10 rules are great, and we want to make sure that we follow them and don't screw them up. So we're going to make a bunch of other rules on top of those 10 rules that are going to make sure that everybody continues to follow the same thing. It was a great intention on the part of Israel. Like, we're going to create all these hundreds of rules, these little things that are going to help clarify the details of the 10 Commandments. But the problem was that it created a bunch of loopholes that you could step into and sin without really having to call it sin. Jesus breaks out this example in Mark chapter 7. And I'm not going to read it to you. I'm going to kind of explain it to you just a little bit. There was a command from God to honor your father and mother. A big blanket statement. Honor them at all times. But Jesus says to the Pharisees, you guys have created this little hole in that rule. They had something that they called Corban, meaning that you could take your assets, your money, your things that you own, and you could say those things are dedicated to God and can be used for nothing else. And then when your parents get old and they need your help and they need, some financial help or a place to stay, or they just need you in their lives, that you could say, I'm sorry, all of my wealth, all of my belongings have been dedicated to God. I can't do anything for you, Mom and Dad. And what a lot of these people would do is they would set those things aside for God, they'd give a little percentage of it, and then they would keep the rest for themselves and dishonor their parents by not helping them in their old age. And so Jesus calls them out. He says, you have a fine way of setting aside the command of God to honor your father and mother by using this man-made tradition called Corban. And it's human nature, though. This is the thing. When all of these rules are set in front of us, whenever anything is put in front of us as a guideline or as a rule, it's human nature for us to push back against that a little bit. It's human nature for us to figure out how much can I toe the line before actually crossing it. It's because we spend so much of our time asking the wrong questions. How much can I do without sinning? Instead of what can I do with my life to honor God? And so these rules create this human nature situation where we're going to push back against them. It looks a little something like this. At the end of this meeting, if I told you guys, whatever you do not exit from Ignite out of those doors over there. Like, what's your first reaction?
Why not?
Like, what the heck? What's through those doors? Something awesome is happening outside those doors. Cliff's trying to deprive us from the joy that exists beyond those doors. What the heck, Cliff? I'm going through those doors. I'm not going through this door around the corner to what's outside that door. I'm going through it because something amazing exists on the other side of that door, and Cliff robbed us of it, right? All of your minds went there. Don't lie. Don't lie. I'm using whatever the heck door I want, Cliff. You don't get to tell me, right? And so the problem with just stacking rules on rules on rules on rules is that we create loopholes and go like, I could peek through the window and not actually use the door and just see what's there. Or I could crack the door a little bit and like check out what's going on out there. And we try to push back against any of these rules that we see happening. In fact, we do this in our own faith. Like we're no better than the Pharisees sometimes. Like, have you ever met that person that, like, gossips through prayer requests? You ever found that person? Like, I'm just concerned because I'm pretty sure that Adam Forney's doing heroin. Right? Did I say that loud from the stage? I did. And so, like, we have these people that, like, we create religious loopholes. Like, I want to gossip about my friends' relationships, and I want to gossip about, you know, who's doing what with whom, and I just want to, I'll mask it as a prayer request, and it'll be cool, because we're talking to the Lord. And we do that in our faith, man. We're no different sometimes than the Pharisees were. So what we really need to start asking is the right question. Not what loophole can I find, but what's the real command of God? What does God ask of me that if I do it, my life will be righteous? If you have your Bible, flip over to Matthew 22, or not, we'll throw it on the screen. Matthew 22, verse 37 to 40 says, Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself." Verse 40, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. 4 words. Love God, love others. If we can do that right, we win. If we can do that right, our lives look holy. If everything that we do goes through the lens of, does this show my devotion to God, and does this help me show God's love to the other people around me, we've gotten it right. And all those other things fall by the wayside. See, pure and proper religion focuses outwardly on that love for God and showing God's love for us to others. When we get it right, it's impossible to land ourselves in religiosity. Because the right rules aren't the point. Loving Jesus is the point. Loving Jesus is the point. The third thing that I see religiosity creating in our lives is what I call country club religion. Country club religion. I didn't grow up as a guy who was a member of things like country clubs. I was just kind of an average Joe small town kid growing up, and now I'm just an average big town person who still doesn't belong to country clubs. Here's what I mean by this mentality. I mean that this is a mentality that says you've got to do these things, know these people, you have to be in the crowd to be accepted. You have to be in the crowd to be accepted. One time I was applying for a job, and the boss guy decided he was going to take me golfing so that we could talk about job things, because I think that's what adults do. So we go and you know, we're going to go out golfing, and I've golfed like a half a dozen times in my life. You know, like 5 of them were putt-putt. So we go, and I'm like, dang, dude, this is going to be pretty weird. And so I show up. I don't have any, like, the right gear. Like, I showed up in jeans. I guess that's not, like, a thing with golfers. I showed up in jeans and a t-shirt. He's like, that's not going to work. And so this guy, he was a size 2XL. He loans me a golf shirt. So, like, I'm like a little boy swimming in daddy's shirt, you know, and we show up to the pro shop. Fortunately, he didn't try to make me wear his pants. I kept the jeans, and we go into the pro shop, and he's like, "Hey, how about you stand behind that rack of clothing over there while I go get us all set up?" Because he didn't want anybody to see my jeans in hopes that they wouldn't let me. Because this is the thing, we didn't go to just like some local par 3 course. He took me out toward Palm Springs to a PGA course, like where they played tournaments and things. Like, this was legit, real stuff. And so I'm out of place. I'm a fish out of water. I don't have any of the right gear or gadgets to be a real golfer. Like, it was very evident from the moment that we pulled in the driveway that I did not belong at this place. It was very evident that this was not a place for me. And that was before I set the ball down on the tee, took my first swing, the ball went straight sideways. I mean, nobody knew yet that I couldn't golf. They just could tell by looking at me that I shouldn't have been there. And in a sense, that's exactly what the Pharisees do with things like some of these rules that they lay out. That they create an elitist society, an elitist culture where only the ones who are in get to be in with God. Only God's children, only Israel. And the end product is that you end up with card-carrying members of a religion, not people who own and live out their faith day to day. And just a little comparison for you, when we think about membership versus ownership, being a member of something means I have to. I have obligations that I have to do for the organization. Ownership means I get to. Membership says I have to. Ownership says I get to. Membership is about what I get out of this relationship with this organization, and ownership is about what I give to it to make it better. Membership values appearances, looking, thinking, acting, speaking the right way. Ownership values authenticity. And lastly, membership is exclusive, but ownership is inclusive. If we're people who are owning our faith, not just card-carrying members of a religion, we want other people to be just as excited about that as we are. We want them to be a part of it with us. We want to share that burden together. The religious leaders were focusing on a set of regulations that limited who could be connected to God because of what they ate or touched. And there's this interesting little moment where Jesus says this. This is still in Mark chapter 7. Again, Jesus called the crowd and said to them, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it's what comes out of a person that defiles them." After he left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about the parable. "Are you so dull?" he asked. Wouldn't you want to be Jesus' friend? Are you so dull? Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it does not go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. He went on, "What comes out of a person is what defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from the inside and defile a person." It's not what goes into your body from the outside, but what comes from the inside of you out that defiles. In that little parenthetical note there, that by saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean, Jesus was laying the foundation for the message of the gospel to go far beyond just the Jewish Israelite people. It was going to go to the entire Gentile world, the ones that were not following food laws and all of these rules set out in the Old Testament. Jesus was laying the foundations for that to happen. By saying, those things just go in, it's processed by your body, and it goes out. It's just food at the end of the day. It has nothing to do with how close or how far you are from God. But it's what is inside already that comes out. The things that we speak, the things that we act out in our lives, that's an overflow of what's already happening inside of your heart. And Jesus says that's what you need to be concerned about. Like, what if your life was like an Instagram feed or a Facebook page? Like, think about your Instagram and the photos that you choose to post there. On some level, even subconsciously, is that not some reflection of what's really going on inside of you? Is not the duck-faced selfie with cleavage, is that not a cry for somebody to please compliment me and tell me I'm pretty? Like, is the random shots where you're like entangled with another human being just like, "Mom, please don't see that. I hope I blocked you." Like, on some level, the things that we post, say, and act out publicly are an overflow of what's happening inside of our hearts. And Jesus is so much more concerned, guys, with what's happening inside your heart than he is with the words that you sing that are written on a screen for you already. He's so much more concerned that you live out every day of your life just going, "The overflow of my heart is to praise and to honor you," than he is for you to jump up and down and throw your hands up in worship. The last thing I ever want God to say to me is that I worshipped him with my lips, but that my heart was far from him. That's the very last thing I would ever want to be accused of. Jesus throws the mentality of the religious leaders on its head when he declares all food clean and says, it's not about being a part of the right crowd, it's about knowing me. It's about knowing God. The right crowd is not the point. Knowing Jesus is the point. The heart of God beats for all people to know him, and it's an inclusive crowd. It's not exclusive. Jesus didn't die on the cross just for the 100-something people sitting in these four walls. Jesus died on the cross so that your friends could know him. Jesus died on the cross so that the stranger on the street could know him, because of the way that you live your life and the things that you choose to let overflow out of your heart. See, when our worship is defined by what we do rather than who God is, we become Pharisees. We like to bag on those guys as like the bad guys in the New Testament because Jesus was always fighting with them. Sometimes, how different really are we from the Pharisees? When we focus so much outwardly on the appearance and on the things that we do to get us closer, to cleanse us before God. We think if we say the right things, we'll find ourselves in the good graces of God. But sometimes we find our hearts are really far from Him. They're bruised, they're tattered, they're broken, they're evil. And the overflow of that evil heart doesn't always add up. But through the work of Christ on the cross, guys, we have this opportunity, through that and that alone, not the traditions we carry, not the things that we do, to have a clean heart before God. You'll never be holy, but because of Jesus, you've been made holy, forgiven, righteous. When God looks at you, He doesn't see anything but Jesus. So let's quit trying to make our actions add up. Let's quit trying to please God by just doing more, and let's start to try to please God by being with Him more. See, our worship becomes true and sweet when we're able to abandon the legalism and religiosity that we practice every day and just begin to embrace the inward work that Jesus is already doing in you and wants to do more of. When we embrace that inward work, it becomes the overflow of that our life's actions and our life's words take. And our worship becomes a sweet sound in the ear of the God who loves us. See, the beauty of this message this morning is that the work of Jesus inwardly in you began long before you even acknowledged who He was or what He had done for you. When Jesus chose willingly to be killed, crucified, sacrificed on a cross to forgive the sins of a broken, fallen, and sinful world, when Jesus chose to give His own life in exchange for the lives of sinful people, it makes no sense. In fact, the Bible tells us that that's how we even know what love is, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Who else do you know that would do that? I know some people in this room really well. I'm pretty sure wouldn't die for me, and I probably wouldn't die for them. But before you even knew who Jesus was, He decided, I love you enough to do that. And if you would just embrace the work that I want to do in you and accept the forgiveness that I have to offer you, you can quit swimming upstream and fighting for righteousness and just be with me and become like me. Guys, we have an opportunity this morning to celebrate that very truth as we worship and take communion. And as we kind of come to the table, we have a couple of them in the back. And guys, don't be in any hurry. Stop for a minute and let this stuff sink in this morning. But you have an opportunity to just accept and to just rest in the inward work that Jesus wants to do in your heart and to remember His sacrifice that made all that possible. The little bread that represents His body that was broken for you. The cup that represents His blood that was spilled out so that you could be forgiven. If that's like totally weird to you this morning, like if you're new or you're just like not quite sure about that, that's totally cool. Don't sweat it. Like you don't have to go to the table. You can just have a moment and just reflect and chill out and think about this truth. But if you're a person who goes, man, Jesus, I want to celebrate and I want to thank you for the gift that you gave me at the cross. That it's not about what I do, but it's about who you are and what you've done. That makes me right before God, and I want to rest in that. I want to find peace in that this morning. Go to the table, celebrate that. If you're just a person and you've got some things with that you're wanting to process this morning, and you're just like, man, I'd like to talk to somebody. Like, we've got some leaders around the room. I'll be in the back here somewhere. Come find me. That's fine. We would love to just talk to you more about who this Jesus is. The one who's the point. The one who is righteousness and who can make you clean, pure, holy, loved by God, worthy, and all of those things that we can't do for ourselves. My prayer is that as we take communion this morning, that you'd also have an opportunity to just sing out some songs in response to what you've just heard. and just worship God because of what He wants to do in and through you. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for doing the very things that we could never do for ourselves. Thank you for displaying your power by dying on the cross and raising from the dead and all of those things that we hear about and sometimes can just become words. God, I pray that we would really find truth in that this morning. That we would really believe in your power to actually forgive our sins and to make us new and to make us right with you and make that relationship right. I pray, God, that we wouldn't fall into patterns of religiosity that just focus on measuring ourselves compared to other people on some tipping scale, and as long as we end up on the holiness tilt, we're okay. I pray that we wouldn't get caught up, God, in loopholes where we push the boundaries of what it means to really sin or have to call it sin. But God, that we would be people who say, my heart's desire is to please the God who loved me enough to die for me. I pray that we would not create some exclusive group of people that somehow have to be in to be accepted, but God, that we would understand that you accept all of us just as we are. And as we come to the table, we celebrate your sacrifice that made that possible. That in our own brokenness and sinfulness and being so far from you, God, that you chose to die for us.